I was reading an essay the other day and I came across the phrase, the arc of history. Arc here, not arc like an Ark of the Covenant, but ARC. The arc of history here referring to the shape, the pattern of history. And it reminded me of Obama's phrase that the arc of history bends toward justice. And I was thinking to myself, this is actually a very typical Obama thing to say. It's profoundly stupid, but it has a kind of mask of intelligence. In other words, it sounds like the arc of history bends towards justice. Now let's think about whether that's true. Is it a fact that there is some automatic pattern in history that moves toward justice? No. Because if you look at historical epochs or eras, we don't see any such consistent pattern. In fact, we see progress and regression occurring all the time. There's progress in Germany, then there's a stagnation in Weimar Germany, then there's a regression with the Nazis, then there's liberation after the Nazis. So where's the pattern? Where's the arc of history? And whether or not it's bending toward justice obviously depends upon when you make the measurement. Things are getting better now, but hey, they could be getting worse later. And that is true at any particular time. So what I'm getting at is that there is this sort of idea, and by the way, this is hardly unique with Obama. In fact, it has deeper roots in Western thought, the notion that history has some kind of built-in pattern. Modern progressivism is based on the idea of progress and things getting better. And look, things do get better in some respects, but I would dispute the idea that they get better in all respects. Materially, if you look long-term, human civilization, things have been getting better. But even then, there have been huge periods of stagnation. I mean, by and large, the standard of living in the 15th century, this was around 1450, was about the same as it was around 450, 1,000 years earlier. So where's the progress? Where's the arc of history bending in any direction? Things seem to be relatively level. Now, admittedly, in the Middle Ages, people would say, wait a minute, who says that we are not making progress? We're making intellectual progress. We're making theological progress. Look at all the founding of monasteries all over Europe. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have to distinguish between material progress, which, by the way, we have seen pretty consistently in the modern era. Life in the 20th and 21st century is better than it was in the 18th century or in the 17th century. So technologically, materially, we do see progress, but who would argue that we see moral progress? Certainly in other respects. Look at family structure, for example. Look at even crime rates. Look at the sense of spiritual anomie or despair. It seems more widespread in our society now than it's been, at least in any time in the recent past, and perhaps even in the more ancient past. I read an interesting article looking at Russian history, and I was thinking about that. I mean, think about a guy, for example, 120 years ago in the early 20th century. He lives in Russia, he supports the Tsar. Is he on the right side of history? Well, yeah, depending upon, again, when you look, if it's 1901, he's on the right side of history all the way till 1917, and then he's on the wrong side of history because the communists come in. And then you go, well, the communism was obviously on the right side of history. And that's, of course, what Marx thought, and that's what Lenin thought. But again, if you're living in 1920 or 1930, it's a Stalin era, and communism seems to be doing pretty well. But then you have the collapse of communism at the end of the 20th century. So now you're on the wrong side of history. You used to be on the right side, but now you're on the wrong side. So there is no pattern here that can be automatically detected. And so Hegel, the philosopher, talked about history moving in a kind of inexorable way toward freedom. A few decades ago, Francis Fukuyama advanced the idea, a very Hegelian idea, of the end of history, almost as if we reach some kind of end point in which there can be no ideological change in the direction of civilization because everything is moving toward equal rights, everything is moving toward greater freedom. But I don't think that this pattern is discernible. The end of history seemed plausible in a brief moment at the end of the Cold War, when it looked like everybody wanted to become like America, everybody wanted to become like the West. Now you go to China, you go to India, you go to South America, and you hear phrases like modernization, yes, westernization, no. In other words, there is a limited endorsement of modernity. And even then, when people say modernization, they don't mean a lot of the malaises of modernity. They don't want crime rates. They don't want cities littered with homeless people. They don't want the kind of suicide rate that you see, for example, in the West. Isn't it strange? You've got higher suicide rates in industrialized, developed countries than you do in poor countries, where people are living far closer to the edge of survival, living much closer, if you will, to necessity. So I'm not convinced that the arc of history is bending in any direction. It's another way of saying that the arc of history is up to people who live in historical time. If you want the arc of history to bend toward justice, you've got to work for justice. So history is ultimately not something that happens. It doesn't have a built-in pattern. History is a product of the free acts of citizens. If you want history to move in a certain direction, you need to work to make that happen.